Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Chapter 5 of the new Apple TV series, Pachinko. After the great episode that we had last week, I figured we would kind of slow down a little bit this week, and we did, but this was still a really good episode too, and this one also had a couple of great scenes. And I want to talk about those scenes, but I also kind of want to talk about this show in like an overall sense, and that this is clearly one of those shows where it's not going for like big splashy kind of shit. You're just gonna get really true, deep character moments that the show works towards, and that the acting pays off. And it's just an emotional, character-driven show that is beautiful to look at. And I've noticed that from episode to episode, the things that I'm taking away from it the most are the big payoff scenes that the show is building up to. Like when you have the scenes like with the rice scene last week, like it takes that building up of the culture and what happened between Japan and Korea, and just the idea of like them not being able to have their hometown rice. You know, like those sorts of things. Like you can't just play that scene without that build up. And this show is doing great with these big emotional character-driven payoff scenes that they do a great job of working up to. So this episode is no different. We still have a couple of great scenes in this one. It just doesn't have as many as the last one. And then I do think this is the first episode that I would say has a weakness. And the weakness in this episode is the Solomon portion of it. I didn't find the Solomon portion stuff to be at all interesting. But fortunately, it's a very small portion of this episode. This episode is mostly about Japan and Korea. Sunja's experiences traveling to and now traveling to and experiencing them, traveling to Japan for the first time as a young woman, and traveling back to Korea as an older woman to spread Kuni's ashes. So I'm gonna talk about the Japan portion, then I'm gonna talk about the Korea portion, and then maybe I'll spend a little time on the Solomon shit. But I don't know, the Solomon shit's not that interesting. But they arrive in Japan, and we hear basically about they being Isaac and Sunja. We basically hear about what we've already been hearing up to this point about how Japan treats Koreans who are living there. And we see this visually, which is, I think, was a cool contrast. When they first arrive, they're riding in, I think it was riding in a car or on a train. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on it, but Yoseb, who is Isaac's brother and Kuni's husband, points out a subway being built. Like, oh, look how advanced we are. We get the subway, motherfucker. It's like 1989. And then they arrive where they're staying, and it's almost like, if you watched Foundation, it's like Foundation has like an area where people with money live, and then an area where people without money live, and they're like buried way the fuck deep down. And that's kind of how this is. Like they arrive at Yoseb and Kuni's home, and there's like fucking like pigs in the street, and like I think he stepped in some shit. And it's like, it just goes to show you how they treat the Koreans there in Japan. And you even hear Yosef tell him something like, make sure you speak in Japan. They got spies out here, like ready to snitch on you. Like it's bad. But they get to his house, and Kuni immediately serves rice, and Sunja tears up. And it's like, immediately, it's like that scene doesn't work without the rice scene from last week. If you don't have that scene, watching her tear for the rice, you just kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe she misses rice from her homeland or something, whatever. But when they really set up how important rice is. And I'm laughing because that is a damn fine piece of writing and television making, when you can have a motherfucker eat a bowl of rice and just know all of the despair and sadness and drama that surrounds them consuming rice. And it's just so good how they can make someone eating a bowl of rice be emotional. But Kuni immediately serves her some rice, and it's like, man, she just got here and you making her cry. But speaking of making her cry and talking about how well despair is conveyed by these actresses, later in the episode, Kyun-yi washes her clothes, and Sunja breaks down because she was intentionally trying to leave that smell of her homeland in there. She said it was all she had left, and I'm assuming not just the smell of her homeland, but probably the smell of her mother on her clothes from hugging her. Like, she wants to leave that in there. She wanted to be able to keep that. And she said that was the last thing she had. And she's breaking down and she's wailing. And it's like, man, this actress does despair so well. Like, the way she was screaming for her mother, like the way she like cries hysterically. Like, this actress does despair great. And you can't help, I mean, anybody can relate to that, you know, having to leave your home, forced to leave your home and go to a place where you are less accepted and you have no choice, and you're still basically still a kid, and you have this strong family connection, and you left your mother, you've left the two other girls who live there, who we'll be talking about later. And yeah, she just does a great job of just this feeling of despair of having to leave everything to go somewhere else that fucking sucks. But yeah, that was a great scene. Second best scene of the episode. So we also find out that Kyun-yi's husband, Yoseb, Isaac's brother, owes money that he got from a loan shark to help fund their trip to Japan. There being Isaac and Sunja's trip, he borrowed money from a loan shark, I guess, or I think it might have been from a bank. I don't know. But they send two, what I'm assuming to be thugs, to collect a portion of the payment. And once Sunja finds out that the money that is owed is because they borrowed it to fund her trip over there, she goes, I'll pay it. And they're like, oh, so we could expect the 20 yen later because he owes 160. She goes, nope, I'll give you the whole thing. Just give me a couple hours. And they're like, what? Where's she going to get this shit? She goes and sells the watch that Kohansu gave her. And essentially, initially, the guy tries to offer, I think, 40 yen or something like that. And she talks her way. She talks her way up to offering him 225. And she still goes, that ain't my price, motherfucker. She says, it's 300 or you don't get it. And he pays the 300. So they go off to pay the people that he took out the loan from. And Kyun-yi is very hesitant for this. She's like, I don't know, like almost like, with us being women, maybe we should be paying off a man's debt, all that kind of stuff, which is justifiable in that time and in that culture to have some trepidation about whether or not you should be rolling up and paying off dudes' debts. And they decide to do it. And sure enough, when they return, Yoseb looks none too happy with what they did. So we'll see how this plays out. Yoseb also had some interesting remarks, seemingly questioning Sunja's motivations, kind of like she was trapping Isaac, which I think he even said something like, I bet that baby ain't even his. It's like, well, it's not, but she didn't trap him either. Like, she didn't make him think it was. He knows it's not his kid, but interesting situation there. Looking forward to see how that plays out over the course of the rest of the season. If this dynamic between Yoseb and Kyun-yi is going to cause trouble with Isaac and Sunja. And then we also see at the end of the episode that Kohansu has found out about the watch and is buying it back. So is he going to continue to make himself a problem as well? So lots to come out of the storyline that we saw in Japan this week. Well, technically last week. I'm recording this on Monday. But in Korea, older Sunja, who has now decided to go back to her homeland to spread Kyun-yi's ashes because she wouldn't want to be buried in Japan, or I don't want to say buried because it's ashes, but you get the point. She wants to be at her homeland. So they've finally made it over there. She's at the fish market, having a good old time. She spreads her ashes at sea, looks like she would have wanted. And then she's like, all right, let me go visit my father's grave. And they get there, and there is a parking lot or a parking garage. They said parking lot, but it seemed elevated. Like, I feel like they were on the roof of a parking garage. But whatever the case may be, ain't no cemetery, just parked cars. And so they go to whatever government building in Korea you would go to find out where a grave was moved from. I don't know what building that is, but they go over there to find out where the grave was moved to, and they can't really find much. They can't really get much information. They just have an interesting conversation about Sunja's nationality. But as soon as they decide to leave, the woman comes back and was like, "Hey, yo, there was a note in the file about moved graves, and do you know what was her name, Shin Boki?" And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "What?" at first too, because at the time I couldn't remember the girl's name. But this was such a good scene, and it starts with her arriving there because when she opens the door, the older actress looks so much like the younger actress that I then knew immediately who it was. I'm like, oh shit, it's old girl. Because I didn't know her name. I just called her old girl. But I looked at those two in the older scenes, the scenes from the 1930s. I looked at them as the optimist and the pessimist. You know, you had her name was Dong Hee. She was the optimist. You know, thinking about, oh, maybe one day I'll get to marry somebody and get to live here and do all this. And Bo-Key was the pessimist who just turned around like, you stop thinking that shit. We ain't worth shit. Only thing we're going to do is drag a man down. Like, and for me, that read as optimism versus pessimism. But really all it was realism versus fantasy. And even though it seemed pessimistic, Bo-Key was just engaging in the reality that they live in, and Dong-Hee was not. And when they reunite, again, incredible seeing these two reuniting and crying. But Bo-Key tells the story of what happened after Sunja left, and she's like, you know, you left. She talks about her mother, and then she goes, eventually she moves to like, you know, we got offered jobs, we left. When we came back, your mother was gone. And that made me wonder too, does Sunja ever return to Korea after she leaves in 1930 whatever? Like, does she ever return before 1989? And if not, does she know like anything about her mother after she left? Like, let's say her mother died 20 years later. Did she know that at the time? Like, I don't know. It maybe makes me wonder a lot about what happened in between, not in between 1930 whatever and 1989, but it makes me wonder about what happened in that time span as far as like what happened with her mother and how much she knew about what was going on in her homeland. But anyway, she says they returned. Her mother was gone, and she says that Dong-Hee couldn't find happiness, and once she couldn't, she decided to kill herself. And the two things I took away from that were, one, it's ironic almost that the person who I called a pessimist in my notes earlier, who was actually just operating in reality, is the one who, because of her understanding of reality, was able to survive. And because the other one, who was almost fantastical in how she looked at the world, when she came back, she couldn't find that anymore. She ended up having to kill herself. So like the optimistic person is the one who didn't make it, and the realistic one is the one who did. That was my first interesting takeaway. And then my second was how good these two actresses were in this scene. You got the actress playing Bo-Key. When she gets to the part about the suicide, she's telling it like this, just like with her eyes closed, like she can't even bear to be talking about it. And then they show Sunja's eyes welling up, and I'm just like, man, like I said earlier, the actresses on this show just do an amazing job conveying emotional wreckage and despair and sadness, just wrought with pain. Like, they do this so well, and I just loved this scene. And I just, like I said, I just love the irony of it almost, and how it worked out for Bo-Key, but it didn't work out for Dong-Hee. I thought that was just great stuff in that scene. Then also we spent some time in Tokyo with Solomon. Like I said, I didn't really like the Solomon stuff. I didn't find it that interesting. He finds out that he's going to be fired from Shifley from Tom. Since he's on a work visa, that means he won't be able to go home. We also find out that he gets a location for Hannah, where she might be at. And I'm assuming that on his quest to find her in that location is where he runs into this guy who knows his father. And, you know, he breaks bread with them. When he gets there, this guy's father seemed to be very standoffish. But as soon as he said that Solomon was his father's son, I forget his father's name, but something starts with an M. But as soon as he, mentioned that, then the guy embraces him. Just like that just shows how valued his father was in this community. And he sits there, he has dinner with them, everything's going great. Then he insults the guy at the end by trying to offer him like pity money, and the guy just won't take it. And he makes a comment about saying that he used to pity him for having to live up to his father, but then that it's weird to pity somebody who has so much. And I think that's interesting that he was essentially offering pity money to a guy who pities him. But, you can get some takeaways from that, but I just didn't find the Solomon stuff to be that compelling. He had a conversation with Naomi that ended kind of funky, where he kind of snapped on her at the end. But yeah, I posed the question in my last video about where we go with Solomon now that he seems to have broken away from his stuffy corporate. I just want success via my job and validation via my job and my pay and my title. That's all that matters to him and not culture. And now that he seems to have broken away from that and embraced his culture, what do you do with him for the rest of this season? And off to a bad start. Not a big fan of where we're going, but I think there's still stuff to be done with this Hannah or Hannah, however you pronounce her name. I think there's still stuff to be done with her. We find out that she was the daughter of his father's friend, I think. So kind of like she was like a childhood friend. They broke up when he went to America, and then I think he said he hadn't seen her since. But she's been calling obviously on the show, not saying where she's at, and then she calls at the end of this episode to say something like, "I don't want to die here. You need to come right away." So presumably this Friday we will find out where she is and why she's there. But that's interesting to me. I want to see that. But this whole side story with the friend of his father, it was all right. So my last couple of thoughts real quick before I wrap this one up. I wanted to talk to you guys. Well, actually, no, I don't want to talk to you guys. I wanted to pose this question of Isaac and Yosef. These sound like Jewish names to me. How do Japanese guys end up with these names? Like, I know a few of you are way more involved in the culture than I am. I got a couple of questions for the production designer, who I just so happen to know. I went to high school with her. I was able to pose those questions to her and got an incredible response, which you can find in the comments to episode 4. But I'm not going to hit her up with all of my fucking culture questions when you guys, I'm sure, can provide me with some info. So how do some Japanese guys end up with names like that? Just try to give me the Cliff Notes version of how that happens. And then I like when Sunja decides that she wants to leave. She's ready to go back home. Like, oh, okay. And her son, Solomon's father, is like, we still got 2 more days. And she's like, oh, it's fine. I've done everything I want to do. It's not like I can't come back. And I'm writing my notes like, aren't you like 110? What do you mean you can't come? You can just come back. That's what somebody says in their 20s who is like, visiting Japan is crazy, but I got to go home early. So it's fine. I can always come back. That's what you say in your 20s. Not when you're 150 like Sunja is in 1989. I just thought that was funny. So, again, not up to par with episode 4, but episode 4 was like crazy fucking good. This was still a really good episode, had some really great moments. Again, the actresses on this show are knocking it out of the park. So at 17 minutes, I will wrap this one up, and I will see you guys, not next week, later this week. I don't know how I'm going to handle Fridays. I have a lot of stuff on Fridays, which is why I'm getting these out so late right now. But I will see you guys at some point very, very soon, hopefully this week, to talk about chapter 6. Peace.